The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey guys, here we are. This is David Mills, of course. Nice comment here. Roberto writes, been anticipating this Q&A for days. It's like Christmas for me right now, and every new slide is like opening a new present. And unfortunately with me, you don't get too many slides, right? You get maybe one or two typically. Not on purpose, but just kind of ends up that way. But I appreciate that very much. And hey guys, for all the people saying hello and everything. Okay, I going to open up with a little bit of commentary or kind of prepared bit of a lesson here, just kind of continuing. I'm not going to teach necessarily totally new things on the live webinars because I like new things to be in a place where you can find them later, that they're organized, you know, in the prepared recorded lessons. But still, it's often a little bit new, or I'll cover things from a new angle. And I'm kind of reinforcing things that are quite practical and but important and so forth. And so I was just thinking the other day, and it kind of became something that I thought I would talk about on this webinar, is this idea, and it's a theme I've talked about the whole way through with law of implication, but this idea of setting yourself up and setting others up for inevitable success. I just have a quick thing I'm reading here. And most people know this, but this will be recorded, so you'll have the slides on the recording itself on the video, just to answer one person's question. Sorry, I'll probably minimize the questions for a little bit. Although maybe I won't. We shall see. All right. Let's see here. So yeah, there's a way that, and then I've also, on the flip side of this, it was hitting me kind of anew how there's so many symptoms that pop up of when we don't believe that our success is inevitable, the law of implication is based on the idea that we should focus on what we can know to be true and build from there. And although there's plenty of stuff we cannot and won't know in life, that if we stick to building on what we can know, then we never really need to leave that method. We can just keep on building and narrowing down and improving our lives in just in a fantastic way. It's shocking how far we can get by just building on what we know. And by the way, I get some various questions, and an answer to a number of questions like, how do we know when we understand? How do we know when we've kind of removed our perspective from something and we have like the core idea? When I talk about like when you look at something with a perspective, you end up experiencing or seeing, when you're seeing something, you see like X and Y, like your perspective, and then plus mixed in with what it really is. And I had a question in my email from Dave Keys. How do we know when we've narrowed it down to what it really is and gotten our perspective out? And to remind people, or to tell you for the first time, if it's not a reminder, if you haven't heard it before, to clarify, often what we know is that we can cross certain things off. And like with OMG in general, I don't know what the exact perfect way is to help people or to give people an overwhelming advantage for money getting, right? But there's all sorts of things I know are definitely not going to help, right? The big one I've talked about is I knew that unless I got you in the room, so to speak, in a consistent basis with one or more coaches or people that are succeeding in something that is duplicatable. And the duplicatable part's very important. The succeeding is important. And then I was pretty much unwilling to do a coaching program anyway but that. And it's funny, when you do something kind of well, like you know, if we have a coaching program generally like this, like where you're able to consistently get training and then questions answered and interaction with people that are really succeeding and that are terrific people, then obviously that's a good start, right? That's doing something pretty well in the first place. And another little thing I wanted to mention on this webinar is that when you're going and getting money for yourself, however you're doing it, then you can pretty much shoot into the top 10 or 5 or I don't know 1% by just paying a decent amount of attention and just doing a consistently good job with the one thing that you're supposed to do, whatever that might be, the important thing. This is also true in relationships, business and romantic and various other relationships. If you just do the thing that's important in the situation well, and then if you just don't screw up otherwise, you show up on time, so to speak, and you're pleasant, and in your own head, you're not being critical and complaining, right, and so forth. Then I mean, we did some remodeling for our house, and my wife was commenting. We finally found one particular guy that does things really well, and he shows up on time and he does a great job, and he charges a reasonable amount, but not too much, not too little. I mean, not that I'd mind if it was too little, but you know what I mean. And he had a guy with him, I think it was his nephew, who was, I don't know the exact age, I wasn't there, but somewhere in the 15 to 20-year-old range. And the nephew was pretty shocked because my wife was telling him, it's amazing. I've dealt with so many different people between, getting things painted and getting this done and cabinets done and that done and so forth. And you're so by far the best, and just by doing a good job with what you're doing, and you show up on time, you return my messages or my calls, and she doesn't like harass people, it's not like she has that many calls, right? But just a reasonable communications, and he returns them consistently. And it's just it's amazing when you find someone like that. And so people that you work with, if you just do that, and I'm not saying you don't, I think that most or all of you do that, but it's a nice confidence builder or a nice feeling that really you're inevitably there, just going to be in the top small portion of what people tend to be dealing with, if you just kind of pay attention and do a particularly good job. And you don't really have to do like a bunch of extra things to do that. You don't really need a lot of bonuses. Same thing in OMG. We don't try to like stack on a million bonuses or anything. We just try to do what we say we're going to do and do a good job with it. Okay, I had a few little related but tangents there. So getting back to the and one loop that might be a little bit open there is this idea about, well, if I can't know, sometimes you don't know the answer, or regarding a particular person, you're not going to know for sure exactly what that person's going to be like, or exactly how they're going to operate in the future, or for sure whether they're going to be a great person to partner up with. But you can. One thing you can know it's often a lot easier to know things that don't match than like you can know certain things that you for sure don't want in a partner. And if we just start crossing those things off, then it's surprising how far we can get, including in ourselves. Another little related sort of quote unquote secret or something is that there's sort of a I don't know how to put this, like a group of people. It's not like an official group, but there's people that think in a certain way where they operate at a pretty high level. When they say they're going to do something, they're generally going to do it, and they don't just try to do the minimum. And they're not satisfied with even like a mediocre job. These people, they're not like perfectionists, but all of the coaches in OMG just happen to be this way. And this isn't something I think that a lot of people fully realize, that there's like a group, there's a way, there's a certain people in the world that it's not like a group where, we know each other, we have like a mailing list or, or a Facebook group, but there's a certain way, there's people that operate on that level, and they are only going to keep relationships up essentially, where I don't mean that they won't be friends with people outside of that, but there's a way that business-wise, particularly, again, this holds true in romantic relationships too. Actually, people they operate in this way, and they do a good job with important things, and it's surprisingly rare that people will do that consistently, because it's not just a matter of willpower; it's a matter of preparation and there's a certain mindset, of course, that goes with it. But and this relates a little bit to the law of attraction, but it's a particularly easy example of just the general law of attraction that sometimes it's easy to kind of go off into a wrong area or wrong conclusions regarding the law of attraction, particularly when something bad happens to somebody and they think that they attracted that, or that the other person attracted it. So that can be wrong. But if just thinking this way explicitly might be particularly helpful to some or all of you, where if you think of it like there's a group of people, or there's a personality type or whatever, it's not the same as like alpha males or females at all. It's not about that. But they just consistently do a good job with things, and they really want to interact with people that are going to take care of their end of things. And it's, in essence, it ends up being sort of high standards, but it's not really about that. It's just like if you hire someone to work on a part of your house, or if someone hires you to do SEO, right? They just want, what do they want? Like, they want you to do a good job with that and otherwise not be a pain, right? And just be mature and reliable and so forth. But although interestingly enough, there actually are a number of business owners that you'd think that that's what they wanted, but they're not in this group, and they might own a business and they might be doing okay, but they just kind of want to feel there's other things that they're focused on, where they just kind of want you to jump through a bunch of hoops, or they operate on a different level, where they're really not like this, where they're not consistently like pleasant and mature and responsible and upholding their end of things. And so there actually are business owners like that. And if you get one of them as a client, then you're going to find that you don't really like it very much, right? But I'm not recommending what you do in that case. You might still want to just finish out the contract and move on with your life. But what I'm just bringing that up to illustrate this, it's a really pretty extremely practical idea, because if you can just get yourself in this echelon, this group, but you only are going to get there and stay there by behaving this way, and these people, they don't really want to control other people that operate like this, and I intentionally are, again, the OMG coaches are like this, because I wouldn't have wanted them being a coach unless they upheld what they do, right? We don't have a lot of meetings behind the scenes, or hardly any, or basically none, essentially. I mean, I communicate with people, obviously, but not all that much. And they just kind of do a great job with what they're doing. And I provide a framework and so forth. But they really take care of their stuff, and they're also positive and responsible. And why do they want to work with me and us at OMG and not be somewhere else? The coaches, they'll pretty much all tell you that they didn't have anywhere else to go, in a sense. It's not like they're here because they had nowhere else to go, but there's not even hardly a plan B out there where they could be in a place where where people operate on this level, where they just take care of their stuff and they're pleasant and they're mature and responsible. There's some way in which it's weirdly rare, and it's almost hard to explain why it's so rare. But one of it is at the point when people are particularly afraid in life, and this relates to scarcity that I talked about last time, there's a way that a lot of people have this fear that there's not enough good stuff out there, and they feel kind of competitive. They feel like they need to control their environment and control other people and kind of operate in a behavioristic way with other people. They want other people to, again, just kind of do what they want, behave in the way they want. And if people don't behave that way, they might get upset. They might not know what to do. They might kind of complain a lot and talk about the people behind their back and all that. And so once you're dealing like that, they might think that they do a great job in life and that they're a great person to work with, but they're not in this group I'm talking about. And if you can make sure to operate this way yourself, you're going to attract, and when I say attract, what's going to happen is you're going to, like in my illustration of like a cell receptor in a bloodstream and hormones bouncing around that latch on to the receptors. It's not like the people are going to be drawn to you like metaphysically like a magnet necessarily. Maybe that's the case, but I don't know anything about, I don't know about that. What is going to happen is you are going to be bouncing around randomly, right? Have interactions with people, and they're naturally going to end up, it's going to look like gravity. It isn't exactly gravity. It's more like things are bouncing around and you're meeting people and you're having little interactions. You're sending off little cues to other people. And it's not even like exactly people are testing each other or not, but people that operate this way, they recognize each other pretty readily. And if you get in life where you're surrounded by people like that, then it's really, really, really great, right? Because they're not so scared. They're operating on this level where they're taking care of what they're supposed to take care of, and they're basically just pleasant and mature and responsible. And it's almost like one hack that kind of stands alone in life. That if you realize to go for that, and it might not be a direct act of will to get there. Some people might hear this, but because of the fear of scarcity that they have, then it might be difficult to like in one instant decision to operate in that level. Or you might have so many things tugging on you in life where your life is too cluttered. But if you start to get rid of clutter, that is going to help you. And then and another thing you can do is just take a clear moment. On the bottom of this slide, I've written, it's absolutely crucial to realize and not lose sight of the fact that our brain typically does not work through these scenarios automatically. What that means is you might not, your automatic sense of what is important to somebody else might not be actually what's important to them. And the only way you might realize what's particularly important to somebody that you might be working with is, or you might potentially be working with, is if you walk through it. Imagine you're actually them. Think about their situation a little bit. I made a video just for the Project Breakthrough people, just talking about some basics. But I made it yesterday. Of course, now that I said that, probably some people are I can put it in the other members areas too. It just might not be so applicable. But let me think what I was saying though. I was talking about other people and what's important to them. Oh, triangulating in is what I was going to say. What you can do is you can maybe pick like 3 details about and it doesn't have to be exactly 3, but about if you're imagining what might be important to a client or a potential client, then you might imagine a couple of details about their particular life or their business. You might even if you might know that they're married, you might not, you might have no information about that. But if you happen to know that, you might even think about that too, and then think about and you might have no information. But if you did, I use this as an example. It doesn't have to only be about their business, because a person's decision making, sometimes if you look at the greater context, you can guess things or figure things out that you couldn't have gotten if you didn't expand your context. Plenty of times you just don't have the information, and then you just don't have it. But if you happen to, for some reason, maybe you just know them a little bit outside of maybe you just know them from life somehow, and they're a potential client. And if you know that they're married and how their marriage is, and if you know that they kind of want their wife to be or husband to be proud of them, and maybe they have a little bit of a wound about that, then that might give you some indication. That's an example of a detail. And if you put that together with a couple of other things about their business itself or what they might want, obviously people want the phone call to ring for their business, but if you just imagine you're them, you might end up with a few more details if you kind of imagine it fleshed out as a scenario. And also what I'm getting at here in this bottom line about it's crucial to realize is that if you do that, if you work through a scenario and triangulate in about a few details about somebody, then what is going to occur to you, what you're going to understand about them, is going to be different than what your brain would have come up with if you did not do that. Your brain doesn't work through that exercise automatically, most likely. Maybe if you do this a lot, then it will intuitively and quickly do that once you train it to do so, just by example. But even then, I wouldn't totally just assume that it's all happening, right? I would still make sure and double check and do the exercise. It only takes a few seconds or a few minutes. But I wanted to make this point in general that it's really like magic if you work through scenarios with your brain. There's a way in which we constantly are implying, we're acting as if it's true that our brain must have already done this. We're trusting conclusions that we feel or that our brain comes up with constantly especially about what's important, right? Because we're always, another thing that's true is that whatever you're focused on or doing at any moment, it must be the case that you think that's the best possible thing you can be focused on. right? In one sense, you understand that it might not be if you were to be all-knowing or something, but there's a way in which it must be true, right? That's at least your brain's judgment about what that's the most important thing to focus on right now. However, and we constantly tend to be trusting our brain's judgment about that, right? We often just assume that the priorities that we feel like matter are the ones that are going to get us the most bang for our buck or make us happiest and other people happiest. But then just with priorities and with most everything else, if you work through a scenario about, if you think about, all right, how about if I work on this thing for an hour or until I finish it, or you're thinking about some particular task, if you think through, just kind of play it out in your mind, how it's going to work over time and what the reward's going to be, then that, excuse me, the connections or what you realize from that might very possibly be different than what you were thinking before you went through that, the scenario, before that went through that exercise. All right. So let's get to the top of this slide here. How do we set ourselves up or others up, right? This isn't about just getting ours, right? We want not only ourselves to be maximally happy over the course of our entire existence, but we want that for everybody else as well. And that's what when I say that I'm here to win, that's what I mean in particular, or if maybe you've never heard me say that, but I'm really here to win in life. And with OMG machines, the same thing regarding what it's supposed to be doing, which is to be profitable for the people that make a profit off it, and then also to give an overwhelming advantage to its members in terms of money getting. Then I'm here to succeed in that, right? So how do we set ourselves up for inevitable success or for potential failure? Or sometimes people end up setting themselves up in a process or a situation where the failure is pretty much inevitable, where they're operating in a way where some deadfall, something's going to pop up that's pretty likely at some point going to pop up. An example of inevitable failure is generally, if you think of how to have a traffic accident, there needs to be generally about maybe three factors that come together, three problems that occur. Maybe there's hazardous road conditions, maybe a person's not paying very good attention, and then on top of that, there's like an inciting incident where someone swerves when they didn't realize it, or two people are trying to get into the same lane from two different sides of the lane or something like that. So of course, it's not exactly three factors every traffic accident, but essentially something like hazardous road conditions, people aren't quite paying attention or they're distracted, and then there's an inciting incident. So if you're, metaphorically speaking, in business or in a relationship, constantly driving where there's hazardous conditions and you're being distracted, then what's going to happen is it's going to look like bad luck that something came and took you out, but it's inevitable failure because at some point some dangerous situation and some inciting incident, some deadfall is going to pop up and it's going to take you out. Whereas if you just didn't have those, if you made sure you weren't distracted and generally didn't drive in hazardous conditions, then even when these incidents come up, particularly if you drive particularly defensively, where you're paying attention to what a person could do, like the worst thing a car could do to make things most dangerous. If you're typically paying attention to that, then it's very unlikely that you're going to get in an accident. And so that's what I mean. That's often what inevitable failure means, is where you're kind of always have two of the three problematic conditions operating, and then it looks like bad luck. The bad luck incident isn't necessarily your fault, but what you wanted to do is not have the other failure conditions be operating constantly. This reminds me that there's a kind of a conclusion that's come to. Normally, I use a method of coming up with ideas that is pretty much the opposite of the typical method. The typical method involves observation. It's a little bit like feeding or eating, where a whole bunch of observations are made, or kind of surface observations are made, and then from that a conclusion is kind of jumped to or extracted. That's not what I do. But an example of what I don't do, but it's the common way of coming up with conclusions, is that there'll be plenty of times when a person will interview or otherwise interact with or do research on a bunch of people that were successful, right? And one of the things that they might come up with is that, oh, that person took a bunch of risks. But if you self-select, you might have heard me talk, you might not, but if you imagine like the game of like Frogger, right? Or if there's a whole bunch of frogs trying to hop across a busy highway, and then you interview the frogs that got to the end, right, that alive, then they might say, "Oh, I persevered. I kept going. I just closed my eyes and jumped for as fast as I could," right? And so, what's the problem with that, right? The problem is that that might have been the exact same thing that the guys that failed did, right? Um, and then maybe there's a bunch of frogs that are still on the other side of the road, and they didn't even start going across the highway, and you're like, "Oh, I'm interviewing the frogs that got on the kind of the good side, that got across, and they all took risks, and they persevered, but then these frogs that are still on the other side, they're just sitting there and they're not taking action, but then we're ignoring all the dead splatted frogs that got splattered, as they doing the same thing that the successful frogs were, but they got a little bit less lucky. What we want to do is have our success method not be, oh, I took a bunch of risks and I made it, or like the guy that wins the poker tournament, maybe he went all in a bunch of times, but the guys that lost the tournament, they went all in too when they had a 98% chance of winning based on the hand that they had showing. But then if you do that, enough times, then you're still going to inevitably fail, even if you have a rule, I only going to go all in if there's a 98% chance that I'm going to win. If you keep doing that, you're going to bust at some point. You're going to go all in. You're going to get that 2% chance of something going wrong. And so if someone's taking risks that could take them out, that's actually not a good strategy. Maybe those frogs they're just sitting there on the other side of the road thinking, well, I think I'll just find a way to be happy over here. Maybe they have an idea. Or maybe they're busy designing. If you're the real smart frog would be busy figuring out a way to get across the road that didn't involve the real risk of getting fully run over by a car. Right? You'd be working on maybe teaming up with some other frogs and building a ramp over the road or something like that. And if you interviewed that frog, maybe it takes him several days or weeks or months to build that ramp over the road. And if you interview him while he's doing that, he might look like he's not doing much, right? And that he's made no progress, but he's doing things exactly right. Okay, now let's talk about potential failure. I'm kind of working backwards here. Let's suppose that someone is trying to accomplish something in business, and maybe they have their website and it's set up and they want to make sales, and then I don't know, maybe something that comes up for us is, right, we have affiliates, and then maybe, let's say an affiliate doesn't do exactly what we hope they're going to do, right, in terms of promoting us. Let's just do me. If I were to get perturbed or upset by an affiliate not doing what I wanted, then it must be the case that I'm acting on the idea that maybe I'm just going to fail really in life, not even just with that task, because I wouldn't even be upset if I was just going to fail with that promotion, but if I was just going to inevitably be very successful overall in life, then it still wouldn't make sense for me to be upset. So the only way, and I'm not saying I get upset at things like this, I'm saying why I would set things up so I wouldn't be getting upset. But if I were to get upset about some sort of person not doing just what I want in a way that I feel like is less efficient or is holding me back or whatever, then if you think about it, and this is pretty profound, right? If you think about it, it has to be true that not only are you implying that it only makes sense to be upset if you could really fail to achieve what you're really trying to achieve, right? And so you've set yourself up. If something comes up that upsets you while you're trying to build something or achieve a goal or get a result, then it means that when you initially set about that whole kind of goal pursuit that you have of trying to get that result or build that web business or whatever it might be, do that promotion or whatever, if something could possibly come up to really upset you, then it must be the case that you believe that you could potentially fail. Now, you might be saying, well, isn't it the case, David, that a promotion could in fact fail, or that a business, yeah, that is true. But there's a difference between, if you've had a chance to listen to my breakthrough series, there's a difference between poking around and trying to see and build understanding and so forth, and failing even on a small scale. if a promotion, I can't really have a promotion not go as quote unquote expected because I don't operate in life in a way that I expect things in that way. I know what I'm going for in a different way. Like I might be going to make sales rather than not make sales, particularly sales that are going to lead to customer success. But that doesn't mean that I have some expectation about how it's going to go, right? That there's not that whole world of trying to approximate based or guess based on expectations and then decide whether you're happy or unhappy based on whether the world fit your expectations or not. That's all the model that I'm trying to get you out of, that I'm trying to show you how to operate differently than that. So because I have that different model, then it's not really a failure in the first place. If I'm poking around, if you're trying to solve a maze and you head down one particular little route in the maze, and it's a dead end, then that's not like a small scale failure. It's not a failure at all, right? You had to just go check out that route on the maze, and then if it's a dead end, you backtrack and go to the next, the fork, or wherever there's a different way to go, and you try that one, And so you can, in general, you want to have a backdrop where you look at life that way. And this is not new information from me, but it's maybe a slightly different angle on it, or at least just repeating a very important way of operating that you want to do. But what's fascinating and what might be a little bit profound and a little bit new is what I'm telling you is that if you're getting upset about a failing or an unexpected thing that comes up that blocks or impedes you on getting a result, then what that implies is that overall, on the grandest scale in your life, you believe in potential failure. Because if you believe that you are inevitably headed for success no matter what, that life was just going to keep on turning out awesome, then you wouldn't be upset about something comes up. You'd be like, all right, so, if you knew for sure you're going to solve a maze, and then if you headed down a dead end, then you wouldn't be upset unless you were separately in a rush, right? But if you get rid of the rush, and if you knew you're going to inevitably succeed, then you also could drop the whole rush, right? And you just enjoy the process of succeeding. And that's actually how your life can be. That is how ultimately, if you expand your understanding of life enough, and when I put it that way, what I mean is that we can artificially have a constraint on a situation. We can kind of feel like there's nothing outside of a particular goal, that we kind of get so wrapped up in that goal, or setting up a particular website, or getting a particular woman or man to like us or something like that. We can get so wrapped up in a goal where it can feel like that's the kind of the sum total of the world at that point, right? And that's common for that to be the case. So I'm not saying anything like particularly odd when I say like if you expand your idea of existence or something like that. I just mean that's just the opposite of not getting so wrapped up in a particular goal. So this profound idea is that if you're getting upset or stressed, and the reason I say this, it's not, of course, it's valuable in and of itself to not feel upset in life, but then it's also inefficient, right? If you're setting yourself, if you feel like there, even if I was going to say if you feel like there's potential failure, but it's funny, you don't even feel like explicitly like you might potentially fail, but it has to be the case that at the root of your belief system or somewhere in your mind, there's this idea of potential failure overall, right? Like on a grand scale. And so there's this way that you believe that you might just overall fail in life, that everything just might go to pieces. And it doesn't have, you don't have to think that way because the world actually is not that way. And again, it can be that way if you artificially constrain it, like conceptually. Like if you narrow your world down into a particular goal that you don't fully control whether it happens or not, which is most things, right? Then like a particular promotion that we might do for OMG, I have a whole number of things that I know to narrow down the potential for failure, but it's still there's things about a particular promotion that are outside of my control, and it might not go all that well. What our brain can do when we're not paying attention or when we don't realize this is it kind of narrows down our whole world in a sense for a little while, into that that situation, that promo seems like they're all there is, or whatever it is in your life where it seems like it's all there is. But if we trace it logically, our brain has to be operating on the idea that we might just overall fail, that like our whole existence is going to end up as a failure, or that it might, not even that it will, but even that it might be. Because when we think it might be, then here's what happens is we start to successively approximate in a way that's not useful. All right, successively approximating, and if that's a new term for you, it'll make somewhat more sense as I continue, and then otherwise you can hear me talk more about it in other recordings. But successive approximation is not necessarily bad. However, there's times when it can be particularly detrimental. And for example, one thing I've used in the past, but it's so easy to see that I'll use it again, is if you have the goal that you want to believe you're attractive, and then if you are jumping to conclusion of whether you're attractive or not, and then you're busy trying, and then every new piece of feedback is critical to you, where you're changing your conclusion about whether you're attractive based on every new person or member of the opposite sex, let's say, that you interact with, and whether they approve of you or disapprove of you. Then that helps to illustrate. And now I'm talking about that on a grand scale in your life, where now instead of it being whether you're attractive or not, you feel like you might just fail overall in life. Even if you don't explicitly affirm that, it must be the case that ultimately your brain believes that, or else you'd never feel upset about so-called setbacks or people getting in your way or not doing what you want and so forth. So if it's the case that you ever feel that way, then you have this idea that you might fail, and you're trying, just like someone with attractiveness, they have this idea they might not be attractive, but they really desperately want to believe that they are. And so each new piece of feedback becomes really important, and it makes them feel strongly one way or the other. It's like a drug, one way or the other, or coming off a drug in a bad way if they get the wrong feedback, and they become very scared and addicted to this feedback. And overall in your life, you might be in this situation where ultimately, again, without really realizing it, you're trying to successfully approximate about whether you're ultimately going to succeed. And that is rooted in what I talked about in the last live recording and what I've talked about in other prepared recordings, is the idea of scarcity, that you have a model for the world, which ultimately is happily it's false, but where there's only a certain amount of goods, like you need these people or objects to be happy. That's not even false. It's not even false that there are goods in the world, that there are things that can make you feel happier than if you just didn't have them. All right, there's opportunities in the world, in other words, for sure. It's not that things or people don't matter, they do. But what there isn't is a scarce amount of those things, because we can create. And there's always more good stuff. There's always more opportunities. And however, people don't believe that. It starts at an early age, and it gets very strongly reinforced in school, which is one of the many reasons why I haven't really ever gotten into all the reasons why school can be so detrimental to a child's psyche. But at the root of it, one of the most important, or maybe possibly the most important thing, is that there's an overall message of scarcity. When you send a child to school, the idea is you need to study hard and get good grades. Well, why could that be? If you need to study hard and get good grades, it has to be the case that there's only a scarce amount of opportunity, or that there's a hierarchy of opportunities, and the really particularly good ones are only going to be open to some people, and there's not enough, and you better struggle in order to get that, to get the good stuff for yourself. As soon as you believe that about life on a deep level, you're screwed. You're really, really, really badly screwed. But the problem is that most everyone believes that, or literally everyone possibly believes that. But it's not true. It's also the reason, but the next recording that I'm going to do, not the live one, but one I'm going to make for you, is I'm finally going to get directly into showing you how to know that God exists, because it's not about religion. I had one person ask in the Facebook group, they were listening to my overview and rundown series, and I guess on the 9th video, I referred to something having to do with God existing. Like maybe I said that I would talk about how to know that God exists a bit, which I did a bit, but I want to go thoroughly into it in a separate recording that I'll do in the next, presumably in the next day or 2 or 3 days. But I say presumably because it's hard to know with the future, and with recordings I might do one and not satisfied with it, I do another one. But they said I think they were an atheist, and they were worried that I was going to start talking from a religious perspective. That's a misunderstanding of the law of implication. Is that it's from no perspective. The whole idea of the law of implication, the whole idea of focusing on what you can know, is you need to find some way to get beneath all perspectives, all lenses. All right. And people have an idea that that's not possible, but that's false. It is possible to think without perspectives. And I am continuing to explain that in the overview and rundown series. Okay. So it's fascinating and profound that when we're getting upset about obstacles or people not doing what we want, it must mean that we're potentially failing. It also must mean that we're successfully approximating just the same as if we were dating, and desperately hoping that we were attractive, but not sure if we were. When instead the way out of it with dating is the following, and I bring this up again because it makes it easy to explain and to show you. The way out of it is to understand that or just have the model. You don't even have to know that the following is exactly true, but just to know that it's a viable model. And then as soon as you get to choose between what I'm about to give you as a model versus the typical model of desperately hoping you're attractive and then being addicted to feedback and being scared of hearing that you're not and so forth, is the model that there are some handful of people, either of the opposite sex or if you're homosexual, same sex, that are also homosexual, one way or the other, that are going to be attracted to you. All right, that number is somewhere between 0 and some handful or some bunch of people. And the only way to change that number is to have yourself be more attractive in some way. And then if you're thinking, well, how do I become more attractive? It's certainly just not by hearing that you are, right? Or hearing that you're not. That's just working on like your brain's little construct of reality about whether you're attractive. Instead, you could think of ways to actually be more attractive as a person, which of course would involve personality and potentially looks as well. But then you can work on that a bit. But then you're working directly on your attractiveness in a real way and not just on feedback. But then separately, regardless of whether it's not even necessarily important to work on how attractive you are. Even currently, there's just going to be probably people that will actually be attracted to you and really attracted to you, not where you have to struggle with it every day and do stuff to make them act attracted to you. So many people get caught up in relationships where they need to struggle. They're kind of in a gray area with the other person, where the person is attracted to them in certain circumstances or in certain situations, or if you do enough to please them or something. And you don't want that. You want someone who's really genuinely attracted to you in a way that you don't have to keep earning it. And then if you understand there's a fixed number of those people, and so you want to concentrate both on finding those people or on upping how attractive you are, right? And then also when you find someone like that, then you value them greatly. And then once you're there, then you're set up for inevitable success. If you look and look and look and you have no hint that anyone on earth is attracted to you, then you're going to need to focus on upping your I was going to say upping your game, but not your game in terms of your act, right? But your game in terms of your real self, and that's not the same as the real you. If you have heard me talk about this before, but yourself is your body, your person, mind, brain, the quality of the ideas. That's not the exact same thing as you, but it's still very important, and that's what people are going to be attracted to, is not you as a conscious being, but yourself, the quality of your ideas, how you then, which of course will come out in how you act, and it'll come across in your countenance and even like how the twinkle in your eye and your energy level, and then just your physical attractiveness. And the great thing is people are just quirky, and just different people are attracted to different people, and it's shocking. I mean, especially it seems, and I'm not going to argue about this with anyone, but it seems like women are particularly flexible with who they can be attracted to, and so as a guy, women are sorry, I got that reversed. Men are particularly flexible, and women are particularly men are flexible. Women are flexible in a different way, where women are pretty quirky, where it's just really random who they're going to just really find very attractive as a man. It's just who's going to guess. They're just but the great thing is that every guy is just going to have, almost just about every guy is going to have some women that just find him really attractive, and everyone else would look at that guy and think, including myself, right? Like it'd just be like, well, I don't have, can't imagine what makes them particularly special. But absolutely, if I was like on the cover of GQ or something, then people would be like wondering what the heck I was doing there, right? But then there's just a tiny percentage of women out there where I've run into 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in my life where they're just really attracted to me for some reason, and I'm just kind of fairly normal, right? And so that's just the case for virtually every guy. I've seen it, So again, I just get into that to show how if you look at things that way, then success is inevitable, right? If you're a guy or a girl, then if you're a girl, you just keep looking till you find a guy that really does it for you, and then keep sifting through those few guys until one of them appreciates it and treats it seriously. If you're a guy, you realize to treat it very seriously when that happens, and people screw that up all the time. Where they when they're successfully approximating, then a girl gets really excited about them, and then they take that as feedback that they're overall super attractive, and then they do the opposite of what they should do, and they appreciate the woman even less, and think that they're so great, and then just want to upgrade in some way. But you can't upgrade off of someone who's reason that you find reasonably attractive and who's crazy about you. Then that's awesome. You don't need to upgrade off that. Just love it. Just move on with your life and be super happy there, and put your creativity in somewhere else. All right. So that's kind of a microcosm. On a overall in life, there's just so many opportunities, and there's so many things. We're all so quirky, right? There's all just different stuff that we like and want, and plus we can just make stuff, and so there's all kinds of you just don't the world isn't set up where there's only so much good stuff, and we might fail. So what we need to do to deal with this is to work through the scenarios, or the scenario in our mind. And so let's say we get upset about a promotion that the person didn't do that as good a job as we wanted, or whatever. You think of something that applies to your life, where the person didn't do the job that you wanted, right? Or your romantic partner isn't operating how you want. Walk it through and say, how is this so bad? Like how is this going to lead to like ultimate failure in my life, ultimate misery? And just walk it through in your life, and walk through how it's going to play out in the next month or year, 10 years, or your whole existence, including potentially after you die on Earth, and then what happens after that. Is it really going to lead to like your ultimate demise? And if it's not going to lead to your ultimate demise, then why would you be upset about it? Like clearly life is how it is. Acknowledge reality, and then ask positive questions. And that statement, you might want to take a note on that. Exactly what you want to do is just kind of a simplified shortcut in life is you acknowledge reality and then ask positive questions. That's different than positive statements. Positive questions make people much happier and get much better results than positive statements or positive affirmations. It's suboptimal to make positive statements or positive affirmations. You want to ask positive questions, including about people that you're working with. Everyone that you work with or you deal with in life is sometimes not going to do ideally what you exactly want at all times, right? And sometimes you're going to feel like really complaining about that person. Instead, you acknowledge that this is just the person, right? This is what's going on, and then ask positive questions about understanding them and about also understanding how to make everything work best, given that that's the reality. That's how they're acting. So saying that if it's not going to lead, if this particular alleged setback is not going to lead that you're upset about right now, or that you're dejected, or you feel guilty, or you feel ashamed, or you feel stressed. Maybe there isn't a thing that someone did that's bothering you, but maybe you're stressed that maybe something will go wrong, right? And that's very common, of course. Or maybe you're afraid that maybe something's going to happen, and it keeps you from taking action that you otherwise, if you run through this scenario. Sometimes if you're hesitant to take action, it's for a good reason. Like maybe you're that frog on the beginning side of the road, and you realize that, hey, no matter how positive I'm thinking, I might just get splattered by a car if I start jumping right now. So I need to figure out something else, such as building a ramp over the road to walk over. I realize that frogs might have difficulty doing that, but you know, give me some slack here. I'm trying to do my best explaining. All right. So so I was saying positive questions, ask you, if it's not going to lead, and I was listing some other things that you could feel stressed, you could feel fear or guilt. No, and I was saying that sometimes if you feel like not taking action, it might actually be right, but you have to walk through the scenario and think, all right, if I take action now, is that just going to be better, or should I get more context and preparation and set myself up for success better? And roughly speaking, the answer to that is going to be, is taking action going to predictably increase my understanding? Like if you're scared to go set up a private blog network site because you're worried you might do it wrong, then that fear is not going to be very helpful. You're not going to take yourself out in life, or even in your SEO life, or even on a particular website by setting things up wrong. Now you might need to go back and quarantine that site later. You might set it up in a way where there's footprints but you're not going to like ruin your business career or your SEO ability or anything like that whatsoever. You're not going to do anything that's going to cause a big problem for yourself if you just get started setting things up. So in that case, if you're afraid to do it, then you probably just want to work through that fear and just again, and you do that by looking at the scenario, just playing it out in your mind and realizing that your fear leads to nothing, that there's no there, and then you just go do it. However, you might see that you might really run into a problem, or you don't know if you're going to run into a big thing that's going to cause you a big setback or really take you out, and then you might need to ask some questions or prepare better, or prepare in a different way that's safer, or take action in a way that's a bit safer. So that's what you might do with fear. But overall, if you're feeling afraid, because you don't need to feel bad in terms of afraid, you might feel careful, and that's smart, right? But that's not exactly the same thing as feeling fear in a way that's unhelpful or bad. If you're feeling in a way that's unhelpful, right? You're stressed in an unhelpful way. You're guilty, upset, fearful in a way that's kind of paralyzing or makes you feel unhappy. Then you walk through and you're going to see that this isn't going to lead to like your ultimate demise. And then when you realize that, it can often just dissolve the feeling right there, which is good. And then you want to design a strategy that's going to set yourself up for inevitable success. So now let's continue on with our one slide. Remember, I told you we probably weren't going to go past one slide. Haven't even gotten to questions yet. It's very difficult for me to know how long it takes to explain something, but I think this is going nicely. I'm glad I'm able to get these ideas out here. All right, is it worked into our goal system? So these are now going to be helpful instructions. Is it worked into our goal system? When I say goal system, I mean kind of like our process for achieving a particular goal, or being happy and successful in life overall, regarding a particular goal or regarding goals in general, right? Like I just said. All right, so here's what you want. You want to know if you're making progress. So if you are working on becoming an SEO consultant, and suppose it's all fairly new to you, and you might be wondering, well, how do I know if I'm making progress? Do I need to see money in my bank account? And I'll tell you that people that feel like that's the result that tells them if they're making progress, the problem with that is it's not a very helpful beacon, because it might not have, like, think of that frog trying to get across the road. If they say, well, I know I'm making progress when I'm partway across the road, then that's actually not helpful, right? Because they might seem like they're making progress and they might get splatted later, for one thing. And it also would give them a false result if their idea of progress would be if they're making it across the road partially for this frog. Then what if they were first collaborating and thinking about ways to alternatively get across the road in a safe way? Then they were building relationships with people that could help them build. Then they were building a ramp. That whole time they'd be making zero progress across getting across the road in the sense of, are they actually closer to the other side, right? But they would be making actual progress wonderfully. They'd be doing it just right. So it would have, if their idea of progress was how far they were going across the road, that would cause them to not realize they were doing a great job doing it when they're doing it right. So you want something a beacon, an idea of of making progress that's accurate, that's not going to give you false negatives or false positives. And that's my thing I tell people is generally you can. This is a bit of a shortcut to some degree, or a little bit depends on what the meaning of understanding means. But as a kind of a useful shortcut, if you're building understanding, then you're making progress. And understanding can be you're having experiences that are making building blocks, you're assembling knowledge, and clearly if you're trying to do SEO, then you're building understanding if you're actually trying to get a site hosted, if you're starting to build content on a site, make links to the site, also if you're watching Greg's videos or other people's videos. But there's a point when, let's say you're watching videos and you feel like your understanding is not increasing, then you might be right. You might need to start getting a feedback loop and start actually doing some stuff, even if it's not going to end up being done exactly right. And I talk about maybe you'll set the thing up wrong. That's not that big of a risk at all, by the way, in the first place, because our training is terrific. So Greg really gives you the exact steps and goes over it very clearly, demonstrates it several ways and several angles. So we have so many angles on things that you're going to be able to do things right in a lot of cases from the get-go. But if you overly worry about that, then that can cause you problems. But I don't want, in my talking about this, to start you thinking that there's a high likelihood that you're going to do things wrong. There isn't. But you still can let go. It's all right if you do a couple things wrong when you're trying to get sites set up in the beginning. So if you just kind of generally use your judgment about what's going to help you build understanding, then you'll probably do a great job with having the right beacon to see that you're making progress. It's a real terrific hack. I've used that for many, many years. We had this idea between Mike and myself, and we've talked about it to other people, of the understanding line, where it's like if you just have an arrow pointing a direction, you're like, as this arrow progresses, your understanding, like this is an arrow of more understanding, that if you're progressing along this understanding line, you're increasing your understanding regarding a particular result or task or project or desire that you have, then you're making that's where you want to look to see that you're making progress. Sometimes that means taking action. Sometimes it means just sitting back and learning, which is a form of taking action, but just watching a video. Other times it might be reflecting, asking questions, writing them down in a notebook, working that way. Sometimes it might look like going through law of implication and learning how to get your ideas, your deeper ideas about your process and your mind correct, right? You're increasing when you're focused with me on law of implication or without me on law of implication ideas, then you're pretty much increasing your understanding about everything because it's a meta strategy. It's like a strategy that applies to more specific strategies. So you're going to be better at doing SEO based on learning law of implication because you're going to be better at most everything in life through the law of implication. This is all meta strategies. So that's another example of progress. You might be working on your foundation, or you might, so that's with law of implication, or you might be working on adding new information, which is what you get from like Greg and other coaches in OMG talking about SEO itself or how to monetize or anything that they teach. So you can add information or you can work on your foundation as we're doing here. How to recognize when we've succeeded. If you haven't already, or you can remember if you have, in the first video in my 2013 series for law of implication is called the results formula shortcut, I believe is the title. And a big part of what I explain in there is that when you want to achieve a result, then what you want to do is picture what the world will look like after you've achieved the result. This is a little bit metaphorical to how if you're trying to break through a board, like with your hand, little hat tip to Tony Robbins here, where if you're trying to break through a board with your hand, then you don't want to focus on the board. You want to focus like on your hand already being through the board, like in your mind. You picture that, and it really changes your muscles. Will otherwise like hold back and work against each other, and you'll often not break the board. Whereas if you picture your hand already having already broken through the board, then you'll tend to break it. So that applies to pretty much anything in life. When you want to achieve a goal, then you want to picture what the world is like after you've achieved the goal, and you want to see how you really enjoy that, how you really like how the world is after you've achieved your goal. When you have that feeling like, yeah, that would be great, then that means your brain itself has connected it up and has that goal installed within it. Sometimes we think that our brain has goals that aren't really there, or the goal is weak, or it's confused with other stuff, or we have conflicting goals. A way to get rid of conflicting goals is if you have something that if you suspect that you have a goal that's interfering or you're sabotaging yourself, then picture, I'm going to be a little quick and vague here, but this will give you enough information that if you work on it yourself, you can do it. If you feel like you have goals that are operating against each other, and one very common one that I talk about of a goal that gets in your way is the goal to already be great, already be smart, already be competent. And again, that goal is rooted on scarcity, because when you believe there's only a certain amount of goods in the world, and then you need to compete for them, then you're afraid you're not competent enough, and you want to believe that you are great and smart and already smart and all your ideas are already right. And you get all excited when you find you're right about something. That goal right there that's based in scarcity, that's based in a false idea, is constantly interfering with people's other goals, because they're busy getting upset at someone. Oh, this person, I think they insulted me, or they weren't respectful to me, or this person corrected me, or maybe there's no this person, but they have a wrong idea and they're scared to recognize it or reflect and realize it because that would hurt their self-esteem, and so forth. So one of the biggies is that's a conflicting goal. And the way you get rid of that is you play that scenario out, just like always. You think your brain's done that, but it hasn't. So you're like, all right, let's suppose I convince myself I'm so intelligent, I'm so wonderful, and and so forth. What's that going to do for me? Well, nothing, right? I mean, now, and then if you say, well, what if I don't say convince myself? What if I really am just super great and wonderful? Well, what would that look like? That would look like you don't have incorrect ideas, right? And that you care about other people, that you're helping both yourself and other people achieve and experience good stuff, goodness. Well, how do you get there? How do you get to be wonderful and super and all that? Well, by fixing any wrong ideas that are in your mind. So to get there, you actually want to do the opposite of trying to convince yourself you're great. You don't. The opposite is not to convince yourself you're not great, but the opposite is, in this case, what I mean is that you're correcting bad ideas. You're trying to find the wrong ideas in your mind. If you and everyone else in the world is not totally happy, which is clearly the case right now, then you're not good enough. Here's your simple proof. This is a great proof. This is how to back your way into knowledge, by how to see what doesn't match. I'm showing you what doesn't match, and so we know something very important. Does the world match the following? Is everyone perfectly happy? No, right? The world is not like that. Since that's the case, it has to be the case that you're not good enough yet, right? Or it's either the case that you're not good enough yet, or it's the case that that you just can't possibly do anything about that, or that you just don't care. Well, you don't know if you can do anything about that. You don't know how much better you can make the world, right? You already believe you can make the world somewhat better, or else you just wouldn't move. You wouldn't be stressed. You wouldn't be afraid. You just think that you have no impact on the world whatsoever, right? So if you have any impact on the world, it must be the case that you believe you can make the world better for yourself and for at least some other people. So if you already believe you can make the world better, you clearly don't know how much better you can make the world. So either you don't care, or though you're not good enough yet, right? You're not powerful enough, you don't have enough understanding, or else the world would already be super. These gurus that say you can achieve anything you want, well, how do they know that? They must not have achieved anything they want, or else they don't care, because the world's not good enough yet, right? So I'm not saying you could do anything you could set your mind to. Maybe there's things that you might set your mind to that you won't be able to do. But what you don't know is whether you can personally make the world amazing. Everyone's just wonderfully happy, perfectly happy. That's very plausible that you yourself can do that for all of it, for everybody. You don't know that you can't. And so, and remember, even if you can't do it all by yourself, make it that great, you already believe you can make it better, right? And you already know that you want the world to be better than it is, for sure, right? And so, but it isn't that way, right? The world isn't as good as you want it to be, so you must not be as good as you want to be. So if you're not, then stop thinking that the only way to get better or to make the world better is to add stuff. You're also going to need to get in and filter out some misunderstandings and some wrong ideas. So once you accept that, then you can drop the whole idea that you need to be already so great, right? Again, you're already not great enough. And I realize, and again, you have to watch out for, I'm super duper, except for maybe I can just add some stuff, right? There's probably some wrong ideas in your mind too. If you ever experience bad, then there's wrong ideas in your mind, most likely, or at least you don't know. It's a pretty plausible. I could delve into that, but it'd be a little bit too much of a tangent, so I'll let that go. Okay, so how to recognize when we've succeeded? You recognize by having a picture in your mind of what the world is like after you've achieved your goal. I have a picture in my mind of what the world can be like if everyone's super happy, right? Just imagine everyone being super happy in a permanent way. They understand certain things about the world. They understand scarcity is not the case. They understand you can create more and more good stuff, that we can all care about each other, not want each other to feel bad. We want other people to feel happy. And so I have that picture. That's what the world will look like after I've succeeded. I'm here to win. I'm here to achieve that. And I think it's plausible to achieve it. All right, this method, it has to be based on the idea of knowing what's true. And then you build on that, how to understand there's no scarcity and so forth. All right, next. But you don't have to do this only on, you don't have to do this only on a grand scale. It's good to do it on a grand scale. So you put everything else in context, but then I also do it on a small scale, right? Regarding this webinar itself, I picture how to recognize if it was a successful webinar. It's different than having expectations. I just imagine people being on, they generally understand reasonably some of what I'm saying, or at least potentially can, and benefit, and they want to keep going and understand more. Let's see here. And maybe some other details, but that gives a gist of it. That's different than having some exact expectation about something, right? So what people do is they think of what their expectation is and do not do that. That's setting yourself up for failure. What I picture in terms of what I want to achieve isn't something I can that exactly involves failure. It's not like I expect the result to happen. I'm just saying that's how I'd recognize, that's how my brain recognizes what I'm generally headed towards. And if I don't achieve it, then I just keep on going and seek understanding, build my understanding, and get there in the future, right? The world doesn't end, or I don't need to get upset, or I haven't had some major setback if the webinar does not turn out that way. But I certainly want to have a sense of what the ideal is. That's not the same as I fail if I don't hit the ideal. That's the ideal, and if I don't hit it, you can work forward in your mind. If you're worried, if habitually your brain sets goals in a way where you're scared that you're not, or you're going to be upset in some way that you're not going to achieve that ideal, then just walk through it and say, well, if I don't achieve that ideal, no problem. I've gained some understanding, right? No matter what, by doing this webinar, there's going to be understanding gained one way or the other, probably by you, and then certainly by me. At least I'll discover a way not to do a webinar, right? And I'm saying going into it. I'm not saying, an hour into it. I'm not being critical of how it's going. Let's see here. But it's important that you work through the scenario in your mind where there's the way for your brain to have an idea of what it looks like after you've succeeded, or else you have no beacon. But differentiate that from having expectations in a way. If you don't hit the ideal, then you just keep on working towards it in the future. A way to filter out bad ideas or misunderstandings. This is easiest to see with, or one easy way to see this is with people. You want in your relationships with people, you don't want like one accident to cause like a real problem, right? You want to operate in a way where you start by operating this way yourself, and then there'll be opportunities to kind of communicate this or demonstrate this to the people that you're interacting with if they don't already know it. But if they think that you said something wrong, or they hear something bad, or just if something comes up, then you want to be able to talk to people that you're in close relationships with and work through the misunderstanding. And I don't really get in close relationships with people where the second that something could be interpreted badly, they do, and I have no opportunity to rectify that, right? Anyone in my life that I'm going to be close to and have a interact with on a regular basis, then I want to make sure that I have some way that we're inevitably going to succeed. And that is the case in my relationships. I don't really have a particular real chance of failure in the relationships that I have, business and personal, because if misunderstandings come up, the relationships with the kind of people that I can talk without that with, and I operate in a way where I'm not like genuinely stabbing anyone in the back, right? I don't do that in the first place, so it's going to be a misunderstanding if there's some issue, and I don't try to control people and so forth. If I needed to control people, if I believed in scarcity, then you've set yourself up for failure in the first place. There's no way you can have relationships that won't fail if you believe in scarcity. You could get lucky and not have them fail, but it's impossible to operate on the optimal level where they're pretty much guaranteed not to fail unless you get rid of the idea of scarcity in your mind. And then otherwise, you want a way to filter out bad ideas if things aren't working with OMG machines as a business. If we have a product that doesn't work out that great, or then like we tried to do a done for you program where we would build and rank a website for people at one point, and it ended up just kind of not working out that great because it would just set everything up for failure. Like people, no matter what we said clearly on our offer, people would have different expectations about it. And it was just a lot of work for the money, and people expected so much to be done for an amount of money that was really much less than it was worth, and so forth. So, but when we operated it, when we offered it, I should say, we sold a bunch of them and made a bunch of money. But instead of continuing to sell them, I already could see that it was the type of thing that might possibly not work out, and so I didn't offer it for a while I let several months go by and to see how it all played out. And again, it played out okay. It wasn't like horrible, but it wasn't the kind of thing that I wanted to continue with. Ultimately, I've narrowed everything down essentially into one program, where it's just a particularly great program and way to do things that sets people up for success. So currently, that's what we have. But by not continuing to sell that program, that done for you program, I was able to, as an example of how I could filter out bad ideas, by not locking ourselves into a situation where we had to keep on convincing ourselves that it would work. So you want a way that you can reflect from time to time. Oh, there's another thing you want to do in life, which is, including just in small situations. For example, I was at the supermarket and I was with my family, my wife and my son, and I'd spent a couple of hours with them, and my wife asked me if I could keep doing something with them or if I needed to do something for work. And I didn't know that I needed to do something for work, but I knew that if I didn't check, then, or if I didn't kind of step back is a better way to put it. It's not really the same as, in this case, checking. If I didn't kind of just step back from things, then if something was going on that was either a particularly good opportunity to take advantage of or something was kind of going off, then I wouldn't notice it. So, and it turned out that it was a great time to talk to Mike. He was at an event, and there was a person that he had interacted with that could do a nice promotion for us, and I realized something but that wasn't locked in yet, and I realized a way that we could frame it and a way we could offer the whole thing that would probably work pretty well, and that ended up working out and happening. So that's kind of a bit of a narrow example that might not illustrate the whole concept, but there's a way that if you're not stepping back, even in any particular day, some people particularly like to do this on the end of the week. I tend to do it even a couple times per day. Generally, I'll kind of step back and not get so caught up in things that I'm not able to kind of keep a certain type of perspective and notice if things are kind of going wrong around the edges. In my life these days, there's not a lot of things that can go wrong on the spur of the moment. A couple of years ago, it was more like that, or 5 years ago, it was even more like that, and so forth. But over time, I was able to set things up where it wasn't like that. But still, there's a way that you can miss out on things if you don't have a way to step back and filter out bad ideas. So with people, you need to be able to work through misunderstandings. You need to have the benefit of the doubt, which means you have to give other people the benefit of the doubt because you're going to influence them to act like yourself, right? Your ideas are going to spread to them to some degree. And you can actually work through this if you have a result, like if you're setting up a website and you want to rank it, and you can think, well, how am I going to know if I'm doing something wrong? What's going to be an indication of that? And make sure you have that kind of worked into your process, where maybe you get it started and then you go back through Greg's videos on how to do a private blog network site setup and check over your process. That's one way to filter things out. It might be that the way the site itself performs or whatever, it might give you an indication, or it might not. But with different, and certainly with relationships, you can think, all right, well, if something comes up or there's a misunderstanding, or if someone wants me to do something, I don't want to do it, how am I going to deal with that? And think that through ahead of time. Another thing that can happen is you think that through regarding customers or clients, which is kind of like a customer of yours, then you might want to make sure your initial offer is not vague in ways that you don't want it to be, and make sure, because before you make before like an agreement is reached, a sale is made, a deal is signed, a contract is agreed to, a purchase is made. Before that happens is a unique opportunity to filter out bad ideas and misunderstandings. It's no longer going to exist in the same way afterwards. Now, you still might say, well, maybe we can have also I can work in a way that we can, that even if misunderstandings or bad ideas come up after the deal is made, that we still have a way to work through those, and that's good as well. And then, but also you can write your sales letter or write up your offer in a way that that heads off a number of bad ideas as well. Now this is a great one, and this is what you want. The main way to do this is with your scenarios, working through it in your mind. How to happily and effectively deal with the unexpected. So what normally happens to people is when there's something that they want, a person to do something or achieve a certain result in a business venture or whatever, then there's kind of their mental model of the world kind of automatically comes up with an idea or a path to that result of what's natural and what kind of the natural obstacles, but they're not, when it's a natural obstacle, it's hardly an obstacle. It's kind of like the natural kind of distance they have to travel and so forth. And then that when something comes up in addition to what seems like natural to a person's mental model, but this isn't done intentionally. This is kind of done behind the scenes automatically and in a way that is suboptimal. If something comes up outside of that or in addition to that, that's an obstacle or a setback or whatever, then generally people will feel bothered by that in some way, and they'll either for a little while or for a long while deal with that setback ineffectively or inefficiently. If you ahead of time, when you're initially setting a goal or wanting to get a result, and all this can be like a matter of seconds once you get it down, then what you can do is say, all right, well, think of something that could come up that's generally unexpected, but it could reasonably happen. And think, well, what am I going to do in that case? And not just what am I going to do, and generally, and what can I most happily and effectively do to deal with that situation, right? It's kind of humorous because what someone might actually do when there's a certain type of setback might be they get upset, they panic, they waste time, they call up a friend and complain and so forth. But if you're picturing it ahead of time, that's pretty funny, right? If you're like, oh, what am I going to do if there's a setback? Well, how about I run around in circles, beat my head against the wall, call up a friend, complain to them, get upset, get angry. How long should I do that for? Maybe 1 hour, 2 hours? Maybe I should do that for like 4 hours. You know, so it's humorous if you think of it ahead of time. It's so ridiculous, and yet it's exactly what people do, and that's such a great illustration of how our brain clearly doesn't work through scenarios, right, itself, or else it would be, that whole thing would be funny when it happens. But people do get upset and ineffective at times. I don't mean that all that people do is get upset and be inefficient. Plenty of people, of course, deal pretty effectively with obstacles. But then there's times when we don't, right? And so if we just work through the scenario of what we'll do, then obviously we're not going to come to the conclusion that we're going to get all upset and ineffective about it and waste someone else's time complaining about it. And so then when something like that comes up or something similar to it comes up, then it's already, the scenario is laid out in our brain and our brain knows just how to deal with it and will naturally deal effectively. I'm almost getting to the point where I might go to some questions here. Normally I plan in these live webinars to do a lot more with the Q&A. In this particular webinar, just ended up on a roll here, so just kind of went with it. We're flexible here, or at least I am. Let's see. When I say I am, I mean kind of imposing the flexibility on you is what I meant. I didn't mean that you were not. Anyhow, last thing here is that there isn't a ticking clock or a time bomb or a deadfall. So when you're going for a result and there's something that you want to achieve, then again, mostly people don't do any of this, and so it just kind of happens as it happens. And then when things come up, they don't really deal with it effectively because they didn't plan for it. But what you want to do is think, all right, well, what kinds of things could come up where it's going to totally take us out? So someone might be in a romantic relationship and they might be telling their friend, and they might be so happy it's going great. It's been like a week or 2 weeks, and they're like, oh man, this person's great. They do this that I like, they do that I like, and we're so happy, and blah blah blah. And they don't stop and think, all right, what could come up that not what can come up where I would want to dump the person, but quite different than that. What would come up that's reasonably to be expected that it'll come up, and where it would take us out if I didn't deal with it properly. But I'll think, how do I deal with that effectively? And sometimes dealing with these deadfalls and time bombs, when it goes off, it's too late to deal with it very, very well. But if you thought about it ahead of time, you could have headed it off just fine, or gotten a plan or a framework or something in place, some resource in place, or an understanding in place for the person to deal with it if and when it comes up. Even if something so simple as, generally with people that I know well, at some point I'll just say to them, or in a time when it kind of just makes sense, I'll say, if something comes up where it seems like I'm saying or doing something that's upsetting or out of character or any kind of thing, make sure to talk to me and we'll work through it. And it very possibly might be a misunderstanding, something along those lines. I might say to somebody. I might just say it real simply. I might just say, hey, if anything comes up that's an issue, just make sure to talk to me. We'll likely, if we can work it out, something like that. Is that going to for sure take care of everything? No, that's not going to all by itself, but it's just part of a whole, overall plan that can help. I mean, that specific example of saying that to somebody. Overall, this is great, is to make sure there's not some deadfall. If there's something that can really take you out, not just with that result, but hurt you in life in a real bad way, then you probably don't want to move forward. You probably want to, unless standing still, unless you're standing on a time bomb, or if you're standing on a time bomb right now, if you don't move, then you might need to take a risk of setting some other time bomb off by moving. But if you're not standing on a time bomb in life, if you are, you want to get off it and not get back on one as best you can. Just get some stable base in your life where you're okay. And then other than that, you don't really need to step into a minefield that could really blow you up. That isn't the secret to success at all. And then instead come up with a plan where there's not going to inevitably be something that can realistically happen. And now I don't mean that you have to store 50 years of water and dried rations in your basement or something like that. I mean, you could if you want. I personally don't happen to have that. But maybe I'm wrong. But I don't mean that you think of the most ridiculous disaster that could happen to you and try to plan for it, right? We have a limited amount of resources in life at any given time, not overall necessarily, but in any given moment. And so we don't necessarily want to spend half of them on some ridiculous apocalypse scenario. But there are things that could reasonably come up, and you want to make sure that you can deal with them or the best you can, or have a plan and so forth. And if you have that, and a lot of what I'm getting at here is when I talk about a traffic accident, it's more like if you're thinking about driving safely down the road, then you think about not being distracted, paying attention to what other cars could do, and generally not going out if there's very hazardous road conditions. You're not thinking, what if some guy targets me with an RPG, like a rocket propelled grenade, while I'm driving down the road, and what do I do about that? And so you start building whatever on your car or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about, right? So you're not trying to come up with ridiculous things. You're trying to come up with realistic things. Realistically, there's things that can happen that are dangerous that can come up in a road, and you want to have conditions where those kinds of things aren't going to take you out. So that's what I'm getting at here. Not like a virtually impossible apocalypse scenarios. Okay, well, there we go. That went on for a good amount of time. Here, let me take a look at the questions. And I won't lose these questions. I'm going to have a list of these. I might just do a sort of quote unquote catch-up webinar that you can either listen to live or record it. Or maybe I'll even do a recording. I'll see something where I can get to questions either from the first webinar and from this one. Just expanding this out now. the question box isn't something that appears on your screen, but I'm going through it right now. All right. Okay. Great. Someone asked if I'm taking questions, and yes, I am. So can you give an example of the error of expectations? That's a good question, although looks like that person has left for the time. This moment, I'm sure they'll listen to the recording. But let me just see if there's anything else. Oh, very cool. I'll just read a comment by someone, but it can be helpful. And this refers to a video that I mentioned earlier is only in Project Breakthrough right now because it kind of helps people that are stuck with the basics. I'll put it in some of the older areas just because I'm referencing on this recording, on this not recording, but this webinar. But Chris Lee wrote, David, I forgot to mention in my earlier comment, which I actually haven't read yet, that your feedback loop explanation. That's what I referenced that briefly here, where when you're learning, you want to set up a feedback loop. That it helped me to understand in a way as to why I was just constantly in learning mode, and learning mode in the sense of where it gets unhelpful. I'm sure this is what Chris Lee is referring to, where you're just kind of watching stuff and not getting the proper sensory feedback loop going by doing stuff. I have started to build my PBNs. I know this is small, but for me it is huge. Thanks, David. So great. I'm really glad. And for anyone else who's stuck in learning mode, it's not that learning and watching videos is bad, but what's bad is when you're plateauing out with it and you're not getting a feedback loop going where you're, or specifically you want to be making progress with understanding. And there's a point where taking action, how do you know when you want to take action, is when taking action is going to help your understanding increase it without taking you out totally. Oh, thank you. It looks like people really have enjoyed what I've talked about here. A couple of good questions here. All right, if the brain is, this is a little bit of a niche question, but I can maybe deal with it fairly quickly. If the brain is completely unconscious, how does hypnosis work? Now, when I say the brain is unconscious, which is correct, it's better to say not the brain is unconscious, but that it's not conscious because it's a mechanism, just like a computer is not conscious. You're conscious, but your brain isn't. You're aware of like the output, in a sense, of your brain. How does hypnosis work? Hypnosis can make connections, can basically install beliefs inside of your brain, and it can kind of rewire things and so forth. And so it can just like many other things, just like having certain experiences in life or realizing something, but in its own kind of angle, it can rewire things so that your natural kind of impulses or what you want to do are different. And if you're doing that intentionally, that can be perfectly helpful. There's something interesting with the brain where people say, well, like with smoking, or depression. Both of these things have an actual neurological basis. Literally everything in the brain, and probably in the mind in general, has a real physical basis, but that because it's made of real neurons connecting and real neuron clusters. But it's also can be changed over time. So your brain is plastic in the sense that it can change. So even if it really is a certain way right now, then if you intervene, then it can change. So depression is real in the sense that there's real neurological connections and habits, and not just habits, but the certain neurotransmitters will be more or less released or taken in or not taken in habitually. Again, in a way that has an organic or a physical basis. However, the brain's plastic, so that even if depression has a real physical basis, it can be it can be changed. And anytime you pretty much it's constantly changing your brain. Certain habits are not constantly changing, but they can be changed by obviously doing the opposite. There's a number of ways to intervene with a habit. Tony Robbins is actually pretty great with what he teaches about this with his neuroassociative conditioning. But you can intervene at different points. You can try acting differently. One of the things that law of implication does for you uniquely is it helps you to understand what is correct. That's not going to instantly change all your neurons, but there's a way in which when you believe that something should be a certain way, or if you're uncertain, which people are often, they don't really know in a clear way, then you're lacking. All right. If you can come to the point where you totally understand and know something has to be true, then it's going to be this constant, powerful kind of gravity. I'm being a little bit metaphorical here, but everything else in your brain is ultimately plastic. If you have an idea that you're clear on because you know it in a way that I show you, not in this recording, but in overall in law of implication, I teach this. If you follow the method and you, roughly speaking, with your consciousness field, with mismatching and so forth. Sorry, let me just, I actually got this slide on here just to flash it on the screen. I'm going to put it on for a second and you can come back and you can, if you're looking at the recording in the future. This is also contained in around video 9, 10, 11 in my overview and rundown series. This is just all the various ingredients of the method. It's not going to be self-explanatory, but at least it gives you a reference of what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm going to go off that slide. Actually, I'll keep it on for now, for a second. All right, this is what's really cool, what I'm explaining now. And this shows the unique value of the law of implication. And when I say that, I don't mean just my course, but the ideas that exist independently of me. You can have something that's solid and unmovable in your mind. And because everything else in your mind is going to be ultimately plastic, it will be this constant force that will get, and sometimes this happens very quickly. Sometimes it can take time, depending on the situation, the nature of the situation. But it's inevitable because it's not moving. It's anchored in this perfect way when you know something in the right way. And this doesn't come through willpower or stubbornness. You have to earn it by working through the correct method. But when you can know something, but I even use the method and everything and constantly as I'm talking, and I gave in this presentation itself, I showed some things you could absolutely know by showing how it couldn't possibly be the opposite. Then again, it's going to be this kind of constant pulse or gravity that's going to draw the plastic part of your mind over to it, and you'll get to where you need to get to either quickly or over time. With hypnosis, that can be a shortcut. Is you're like, all right, I know that I want to think a certain way. I know I don't want to crave cigarettes. If I want to have a cigarette, I want to have a cigarette, but I don't want it to be something where I crave it in a way that I don't want. So I go to a hypnotist. They hypnotize me and change a few things, and for a short time or a long period of time, and it might end up being permanent based on the rest of how you live your life and you think. Then it can just adjust it right there, and that's perfectly reasonable to do because if your brain can be your neurons can be hooked up in a way that's not helpful for sure, and you can have habits and connections that easily fire off. Right? If you walk down a certain path, and again, this is a reference to Tony Robbins here. If you walk down a certain path over and over again, like in the grass, it gets trodden, right? Or if you scratch a record in a certain way. Well, sorry, that's actually there's record scratching is kind of how you undo it. But if you walk a path on the grass, it gets trodden strongly, and the grass kind of goes away, and there's a clear path. With your brain, if you keep doing things in a certain way, neurons get thicker and thicker for that connection, and it becomes easier and easier for that reaction to happen or that feeling to happen or for you to want a certain thing. And still, the law of implication is the one way out, always. It's the sure way out. There's other ways that might work in practice, but they're all uncertain. They're all basically plastic, or they're not fully solid. The one place regarding ideas to get absolute solidness, which is going to change the game for you completely, is through this method here, which you get by seeking it, by wanting to understand what the method is to know what's true. Nice. Good. Looks like I was helpful with that answer. Now, what was the other thing that I'm looking at here? I was going to answer next. Okay. Not sure how good a job I'll do fully answering this, but I'll see what I come up with. If the brain is completely unconscious, sorry, I misread. The different question. I am curious as to how do you come up with the ideas if not by observation? Okay. First again, I'll review the observational method that people use is they will generally for people what people want to do is they want to see what the truth is. What you want to be able to do is become very comfortable understanding that in a way, there might be a way to twist what I'm saying that where it wouldn't be correct, but in the way that I mean it, you'll never see what the truth is. Because to see is to mix a perspective with something that you're observing, and then you get the end result of the mix between your lens, your perspective, and the thing that you're observing. Normally, the way people operate is from infancy, is that that result of seeing, when you like the idea, they take on the idea that the world is the way that it seems, so that they look around and they see the world physically, or they'll feel like they want something like to be fed, and then they get fed and that feels good. That it all seems a certain way, and they'll take on, well, that is how the world is, and then that's how their mental model of the world gets built. And it stays built that way unless there's expectation failure. First, when there's something that doesn't seem to fit in with the way the world, someone's mental model, they'll kind of force fit it. They'll try to delete or tweak or force it in some way to fit, like kind of put it in a box, so to speak. And so that's people's mind's first reaction. It's trying to fit things into the world. They might delete things altogether if it doesn't fit within their model. And sometimes people might do what's more correct, which is to seek to expand their model of the world if something doesn't fit. But mostly people try to just fit it in one way or the other, or just make the smallest possible change to their mental model that they need to make in order to then force fit in the kind of thing that didn't meet their expectations in. That whole way of dealing with the world isn't how things have to be. You can instead look around at the world and see what you see and say, all right, well, this is how things seem. And I'm going to need a method to go from there, is to start by saying, all right, it is true that how things seem is how they seem. I know that much, but that I don't know that all the conclusions I have, if a person seems nice, if a person seems like a jerk, that's not necessarily true. Even the physical world, it seems a certain way, but that it might not actually be the way that it seems. It might seem like God is far away, or that we can't know how God exists because authority figures and everyone else agrees that you can't know. So that's how it seems to me. It seems like you can't know for sure. You have to believe it. That's what faith is. All these things, because people hear them. They hear it from, again, authority, or they absorb it. It now seems true to them. And so then people operate on the idea that people don't generally have the distinction between, they don't even use the word seems all that much. What I'm saying is kind of foreign, because seems and is like one and the same to people. All right, so just to remind ourselves of the actual question here, how do I come up with my ideas if not by observation? In essence, it's the whole method that's on the screen. But what I try to do is I build. Oh, here's a really helpful thing for me, at least, but it'll give a little bit of an indication. What happened one day was that I realized I was basically I was discussing the proof of God that I had up to that point with somebody, which is a fairly good proof, but I still didn't have the whole method of how to know what's true yet, which is a problem. In order to know how to know anything, including whether God exists, you need to first have a method by which to know what's true and know what that is. And so I was still developing that. and a person had a particular objection. I can't remember exactly what it was, but that led to me to I was just poking around, and I happened to draw the line conceptually about the world, sort of. Hopefully explain what I mean decently here, in a unique way, a way that I hadn't done before, and in a way that it turns out that as I interact with other people and I read books and so forth, people don't really draw the line exactly in this way. And this is not totally new. I've said this before in some recordings, but I drew the line at everything that I'm currently aware of, directly currently aware of, which again, it's not that I know exactly what that might be, but it's just, I'm still drawing the line there. Everything I'm aware of, and then everything I'm not. And another way to, instead of saying, well, okay, so what are you aware of? It's more like, clearly there's a lot of stuff in the world that I'm not aware of, right? Whatever that might be. So since I know that I'm not aware of some stuff, and this is an example of you start by mismatching, by showing what isn't the case. So it isn't the case that I'm all knowing. So there must be a bunch of stuff I'm not aware of. It's also not the case that I'm not aware of anything. So I'm aware of something. So let me just conceptually draw. This isn't going to be too fancy a thing, but I can use a little GoToWebinar drawing tool. Okay, so if I draw like a little, ooh, that's not the right tool. Pen. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to draw a circle here, nothing too fancy. So if this circle represents everything that I am aware of right now, and remember that circle has to have something in it, because I might not know exactly what it is that's in there. But if I wasn't aware of anything, it would have nothing in it. If I was all knowing, then it would have everything in it. But neither of those is correct. So I'm aware of something. It has to be the case. And then there's everything else that I'm not aware of. And I'm going to call this, whatever I'm directly currently aware of, I'm going to call that my consciousness field. All right, kind of like a little, metaphorically, like a movie screen that involves like what I look at when I see, or what I feel, what it seems like I see sensorily, externally, plus whatever's going on in my head. If I feel like I'm remembering something, that's all in here, regardless whether it feels like it's in my mind or in my head, or whether it feels like it's external. Even if I look at the moon, the idea is that it's many, many miles away. But it's still right there. My experience of the moon, not maybe the moon itself, but my experience of it, that little visual experience, whatever, that's right there in my consciousness field. Right, I'm aware of that. So even if it's supposed to be far away, even if it's in my head, even if it's right nearby, if I'm directly aware of it, that's my consciousness field. And then everything else is everything else, and it's outside of my consciousness field. By drawing the line that way, I was able to develop everything else. That's, of course, not a full answer to the question, but that gives it something that you can start to work off of, and of course we'll just develop things over time more together. Let me pick another question here. And I'm a little bit picking these at random, by the way, not like best questions or worst questions or whatever. Isn't your, and I'm actually I haven't even read the whole thing before I'm reading it out loud, but it seems like it'll hopefully turn out to be a reasonable question. Isn't your relationship attractiveness example also a way to see your results in client getting for inevitable success rather than a numbers game approach? Absolutely. So in the idea of the relationship's attractiveness example is I switched things in my mind and it made a difference like you wouldn't believe. Where I understood there's a handful of people out there that are going to find me attractive, and I want to find those people. Let me just make sure I read this question properly. Also a way to see results in client getting for example, rather than a numbers game. Right. So in one sense, it's a numbers game, but not really, right? Where what I'm trying to do is put out communications or find communications and respond to them. I want to kind of put out feelers in the world, right? For the people that would be attracted to me. Now we'll talk about it in terms of clients. The people that want you as a not as a client, but they want to be your client, right? They're a business owner. They want you to rank a website for them. There's people out there that really want that, and they want you in particular. And they're going to be putting out feelers a little bit, and then you can put out your own feelers, and you want to get those together in a certain way, right? You want to be getting yourself in places where they're going to be looking, where they're going to be around, and so forth. One of those ways is just to simply rank a website for your city SEO or your city web design or anything like that, because then some of those people might go online and type in your city SEO, right? Franklin SEO, Nashville SEO, New York SEO, whatever. But there's zillions of ways to do it. We cover those all over the place in the monetization section of OMG. But absolutely, if you're looking at it like the wrong dating way, then you feel desperate all the time, and you don't come across as attractive. Well, that was one thing I didn't mention in this particular time when I talked about that example. Is the interesting thing is if you think through, okay, there's certain people that are attracted to me, and then I can up how attractive I am. And then if I operate in a way where I think there's so many people that could possibly be attracted to me, and I need to pander to those people and twist myself in circles and be self-conscious and so forth in order to get those people to like me because they're kind of on the fence, then I'm actually going to not be very attractive because I'm going to be self-conscious. I'm going to look desperate. I'm not going to have the kind of control in the way that Cotton talks about it. And he talks about it in a pretty useful way. About keeping the right framing and control and so forth. You're not really trying to control the client. You're more trying to control what you do, right? Which is fine. You have your own property, your own offer, and you want to maintain control of your own offer. I think is a reasonable way to represent how Cotton talks about it. And Cotton's the super awesome, expert on this, who innovated terrifically. So yeah, ironically, you'll be more desperate and so forth if you look at it in the way where there's all these people and you just need to please them and pander to them and kiss their ass and so forth. Instead, you want to look at it like the right sort of people you'll appeal to, especially if you up your own real attractiveness, we can call it, like the attractiveness that you should have, the attractiveness where people that are high quality clients, where they're going to naturally want you. So that's that. Just reading a question here for a second. Yeah, the answer is going to be basically yes to this question. But is that then, this would have been referring to something I said not this second, but during this recording. Is that then about making sure that apparent failure is seen more accurately as like you're not failing, but you're testing and integrating the result as like feedback and learning to know more? Yeah, you're basically reframing what otherwise would be called failure. You're reframing, but it's not just an arbitrary or a reframe. And this person didn't imply that it was, but it's actually not just, it's a more correct frame. It's not just a one way or the other way. This is the more correct way to look at it. To see it as failure really makes no sense. If you are doing something and or you can call it failure technically, as long as failure doesn't have a negative connotation. But one way or the other, once you start looking at your endeavors in life as you're either building your understanding or you're not, and you're making progress if you're building your understanding, especially when you make sure that includes taking action, because certainly taking action is a big part of the feedback loop of understanding. Then that's the great way to look at life, and you'll be constantly very effective. You'll also be, not only will you be effective in your achieving your goals, but you'll be very likable, and you'll attract a higher caliber of person that you'll work with. And it's such a hack, it's such a shortcut in life when you start attracting and keeping relationships with people that are operating on this level as well. It's just ridiculous. Life gets so easy because you're dealing with people that keep their word and they're responsible and they do a great job. And you team up, right? And you can sometimes make a product or a business with those people. And then they handle their end, and you handle what you're good at, and it just becomes a dream. Is it quick and easy to get there? I don't know. It took me a while to get there personally, but I had to figure a lot of this stuff out from scratch. But maybe knowing this directly, maybe you can get there pretty fast. Plus, you have the great tools in OMG where you're going to learn. The great thing about learning search engine optimization and or the Amazon stuff is you have a real valuable thing to trade. Sometimes there's people that think, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. I just wanted to hire everybody to do the tasks that they need to do, and then I just kind of design the business as a whole. Maybe if you're really, really good at that, but I'd highly recommend as a way to put more advantages on your side. If you have one real tangible skill that people want, it makes it way easier to start interacting with people and teaming up with people than if your supposed skill is you're the boss and you tell everyone what to do and you're so smart and so forth. Just looking over some more questions here. Okay, this is an interesting question, and it might be a little odd or confusing to some people, but that's but it won't be to others, and I don't want to leave questions out just because of that. I think it's a terrific question, actually. If we, and he's saying we as a conscious being, not as our self, like our brain and our body. He means also that the person who's aware of your consciousness field. If we are, as conscious beings, are interacting with and experiencing the quote-unquote program that exists in the mind of God. So John here is referencing, who asked the question, is referencing something I've said in the past where essentially the physical world is not quite as it seems to be to you, but it's basically code. You can think of it as a shortcut for now, as like code in the mind of God. And that's not a guess, that's something that pretty much has to be the case, what I'm saying, but I'm not going to stop and separately discuss that or prove it right now. This is more, you can either refer back to this if you've never heard me say that before, or plenty of people have heard me, and then you can follow along with it. So we're conscious, we're interacting with this kind of external code that we're all interacting with, the what we think of as the world, the external world. So can we interact with and modify, change the program, like kind of the program itself? In other words, the equivalent of cheat codes exist. If so, how can we access them? The main answer is I don't quite know right now. I'm interested in that topic myself. I think it's fascinating. There's certainly things that I've shared that kind of act almost as well as if they're cheat. What I have at this point is stuff that acts pretty much as well as a cheat code. At this point, instead of trying to focus on kind of like magic ways to kind of rig the game, what I found the best actual results with is that if we understand that the game is already rigged, it's almost like the cheat codes are already entered into the system in a sense. And I'm not trying to totally cop out. I would love to figure out if there's extra cheat codes and so forth. And I do think about that sort of thing. But again, where I found the real breakthroughs and results that I have to share with you are things that operate as if they're magic, but they're actually quite understandable within the way the world actually works. And one of the things I've discussed on this webinar, and I've talked about, and I really stressed, is that if you work through scenarios in your mind and carry them forward and work them all the way through to the end that you're trying to get to, and I've talked about that a lot, so I won't repeat about that right now. But if you do that, it really works almost like as if it's a cheat code, when it's of course not, but in a sense. But you get as close to magic as I had gotten by working through scenarios like that with our minds. And it's really extraordinary what our minds can do if you get a goal in there properly and without things working against it, and you declutter to also just not have a bunch of friction and so forth, then it's pretty amazing where that will lead. So that's the best answer I can give right now to that. Let me see what's coming up here. Yeah, I agree. The person who asked the question about the cheat codes, he said, thanks. I asked the last question because I've encountered people capable of getting results, particularly in healing others, where this seems to be, this makes me think of something, another thing I want to tell you, that they were able to do, but I'd rather understand instead of observe. Right. Like, I agree that there's people that reportedly do pretty amazing things, and it seems like there's a reasonable amount of evidence that people can do sort of miraculous things in the realm of healing and other cases. And I would like to understand that more. One thing in terms of prayer that I might point out is that I think people don't realize two things when it comes to prayer, and this is a little bit tangential to the question, but it brought it to mind. One is that if prayer works in the first place, then praying that God's will be done in your life and in the world, but in your life, no matter what, no compromise, then that's going to be the best thing that you'd want, right? It's a little scary at first because you might think, oh, what if God wants me to go to Zimbabwe or something like that? But it was a little scary for me at first years ago to start praying that, but now I pray that regularly, and it's pretty obvious that God's here. Everything's rigged for you to be really happy and things to be wonderful. So if what God wants is actually done, then that's going to be real good. There's not going to be some problem. God's not sitting around like, oh, I'm going to torture this guy and send him to Zimbabwe to do whatever, unless somehow that was really generally going to make you very happy. There's not going to be something that's going to be miserable that God's going to want. So God's not deceived. I know I'm getting a little bit into things I haven't fully talked about before, but just for those that want to take this kind of quick little suggestion, they can. Another thing that I want to point out that's a little bit related is kind of reinvesting into the idea of understanding, both with prayer and outside of prayer. That one thing is to pray like for wisdom itself, wisdom and how to understand understanding. Also, what I would ask God, and I do ask God consistently, is what am I missing? Could you please show me what I'm missing, right? Because what is it that it would be great for me to understand, but I don't understand yet? And so that I think is another great thing. So to the extent that prayer has an effect, which I'm pretty sure it does, but I don't understand it fully. But it isn't like some big sacrifice anyway, right? It's pretty quick and easy to pray, and it's going to have some effect on our mind anyway in setting goals. Great. So yeah, John liked that about what am I missing? That's a great thing to ask. And I have one of the things that I have done. Of course, I've applied these methods, but I've really strongly include an interaction with God that I don't talk about over much. I do reference the fact that God exists, of course, but I interact with God not in the sense that God has like a voice and exactly talks to me. To the extent I think for a lot of us it feels like maybe God talks to us sometimes, but I'm quite skeptical is not the right word, but I treat it the same as everything else. If I feel like, oh, maybe this is God guiding me a little bit in my head, then I treat it the same as any other thing where it seems a certain way, and I would independently want to be working through it. I take it more as like a hint, a potential hint, so I don't act on things. And particularly if it was ever like hurt somebody else or oppress somebody else or whatever, I would never act on something. I don't have that. I don't have like voice in my head telling me to hurt somebody, but if there were, I for sure wouldn't. And otherwise, but even if it was like, hey, go to Zimbabwe, I probably wouldn't just pack my bags and go to Zimbabwe just based on a feeling like I felt like God was talking to me in my head. It would probably, for whatever reason, need to be more than that. But I do interact with God in the sense of kind of praying. A lot of how I work on ideas is a little bit like a conversation where I'm directing it a bit towards God. It's not like I'm having a conversation with God where I believe that God's responding to me. So that's very important. So it's not like I think that God is just explicitly talking to me in my head. I do not think that. However, it kind of gives me a little bit of a person to talk to in a sense. Like sometimes I'll imaginarily talk to an audience. Sometimes I'll imaginarily talk to a particular person if I know they have a question or something. But a lot of times I do interact with God and ask what I'm missing and have a bit of an ongoing request in that way. So that can just give you a little bit of this is a little bit more of me kind of testifying. I'm not like saying what I do, which is a little bit different than a proof of something. Um, but it isn't clearly wrong or ineffective the way that I do it. Another thing I did to help figure things out, in addition to my methods that I explained, is I look carefully at the words that Jesus has recorded to say, and the things that are pretty. There's some things that Jesus said that are pretty fascinating and pretty easy to delete and not fit in our worldview. And what I wanted to do was expand my worldview. Actually, I didn't want to expand it. I wanted to break it, which is a little bit unique. I didn't, and this also goes more to the heart of my methods and my process that I used, which is kind of a good thing to do, sort of at the tail end of these webinars. So, and this is actually a kind of a relevant distinction. I didn't just want to expand and tweak my worldview. I felt like the way that I saw the world, there had to be something fundamentally wrong with it. Like it was set up for failure. And the scarcity thing is a good indication of where I realized where if you understand that there's no ultimate scarcity, that you can't get there from a normal person's worldview. That's not a small tweak. That's a total break from the typical way of understanding the world. So because I had a sense that the way I understood the world, something about it, you couldn't get there from here. You couldn't get to be totally happy and have everyone else be happy from the constraint of how I used to view the world. And so I really wanted to break it. So that helps. And that might be helpful for you. And then part of how I did that was I looked at some things that Jesus said that just could not fit in our current worldview. One of the ones in particular was the idea that if you have the faith, I might be paraphrasing together two different references, but if you have the faith of a mustard seed, then, and I'm pretty sure this is two different references put together, but if you have enough faith, basically, then you can say to a mountain, throw yourself into the sea and it'll be done for you, which is interesting. It doesn't say that it'll just happen. It says it'll be done for you. And I know that I can't just tell a mountain, even metaphorically necessarily, to don't go do that. Or maybe I could make some arguments that certain things I've accomplished at this point maybe are metaphorical to that, maybe not. But when I started on this, I didn't have anything even that could possibly pass for that in my life. And so I knew I didn't understand it well enough. And it seemed like other people didn't either, because if they could, then why wouldn't they be doing more to help the world and themselves, right? People are just generally upset a lot more than they need to be. Even if they're not happy 95% of the time, that's a heck of a lot of time to be upset, right? That's like 5 days out of every 100, 15 days, 16, 17, it's like, I don't know, 16 or 17 days a year, or sorry, 17, whatever, around 17-ish, 18 days a year being upset if you're upset 5% of the time. So to speak, which is a lot, right? It's a lot to be upset. And that's just 1 year. And then you multiply that by your lifetime. So people didn't understand that. And they didn't seem to like really think about it or talk about it much. And I really focused on trying to understand what faith could possibly mean and so forth. So that was a little bit of where I focused and what I did. Cool. Okay, some of the comments are just kind of private comments or suggestions, and I'm reading those, and I'll have those saved. There's a question from Dave Keys relating to are we inherently about being inherently evil or good, and he said, I realize we're inherently valuable. I've heard you say that we're basically good and that what we want is good, but doesn't that mismatch with what Paul wrote in Romans, where obviously what Paul wrote, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God and so forth. I don't know that I say exactly that we're basically good. There's a number of things that this allows me to point out from David's question. My point is not that we're inherently good. When I say that we want to be maximally happy, have good experience, good happy experience throughout our existence, and we want other people to be the same way. If I've ever said that, it's a little bit of a shorthand. Of course, people's brains right now aren't wired where the brain has that connected. For sure, people don't want that for the most part. because of scarcity, right? When your fundamental worldview is grounded in scarcity and it's reinforced so strongly in school, and no one comes out and says it, but so many of our actions don't make sense, right? It doesn't make any sense the way school is, for example, unless the world was scarce. Why would you have to compete rather than be taught how to create? You're not taught how to create particularly, or at least you're mainly taught about competition rather than creation. So so once someone believes in scarcity, then they're going to have all kinds of basically evil thoughts because it's you or me, right? If there's a limited number of goods, and once you start there, then you can kind of people approximate to some reason to the appearance of goodness within the scarcity by forming tribes, right? They're like, oh well, it's us against them, right? But then they're not very nice to them, basically. So it's not that I think that people know that they want that. When I say that you want that, I mean you as a conscious being want that, not your brain. And I don't think your brain is good or evil. I think it has, for mine and other people's, have incorrect ideas, contradictions. Contradictions lead to bad, which is basically evil. So contradictions, evil, bad, those are all tied up together. So that maybe helps explain a little bit better about what I mean by good. Regarding Paul, there's a way that many Christians imply that Paul is basically God, whereas they would deny this. They would say, oh no, I don't think Paul's God. But then they'll be like, oh well, here's what God says, and they'll turn to something Paul wrote to a church at some point. Jesus didn't reference Paul at all. Paul didn't fulfill prophecies that I know of, and I personally see what look like errors in what Paul wrote. And all of the condemnation of homosexuality comes in the New Testament comes basically from Paul, as far as I'm aware. When I talk about facts like that, I could theoretically have them wrong. But and when I mention homosexuality, it's not like I have a chip on my shoulder or a particular crusade about that. But when you're talking about condemning and oppressing, and I get the idea of loving them, but still thinking that they're all wrong and sinful. But there's an oppression to thinking that someone is like fundamentally morally wrong about something. It's very much like if thinking that they're morally wrong for being left-handed or having red hair or something like that. You're like, oh well, I love red-haired people, but anyhow. But I don't quite see the deification of Paul. I don't see why something has to be infallible because Paul wrote it. That is different than what many Christians, the conclusion they come to. But again, for something to be infallible, I take that extremely, extremely seriously. And I don't get how someone can say they know that Paul's infallible. And then someone might say, well, how do you know Jesus is infallible? I don't exactly, right? I know that if Jesus was God, then that would be infallible. But I use it to open me up and to indicate I act as if Jesus is God, but not in a way that would hurt anyone else, right? And I don't, nothing that I see from Jesus would hurt anybody else. But I'm just saying if Jesus did come up with something that contradicted what I knew to be true, which I haven't seen, but if Jesus did do that, then I would I'd basically keep looking and try to figure it out. I wouldn't just say, oh, so that, and I'm not trying to, remember, nothing in law of implication is me trying to impose a perspective or point of view or get religious or anything like that. It's all based on what we know, the idea of knowing of focusing on what we can know to be true. And one of those things ends up meandering into topics that are regarding God. That because of the whole scarcity thing, though, it matters very much about God, and ultimately what's going on with why and how we're here and so forth. Let's see what else we might have here. Okay, this is a pretty good practical question here. David, how can we use LOI to be consistent? This might be the last question I do. It's getting a little late. David, how can we use LOI to be consistent in our daily work? I find it hard to be consistent and work daily on ranking when something's come up on your plate. We all have our goals in mind and reasons why, but in that regard, how would you see a daily plan of action, especially to get to the amount of revenue we desire? Okay, personally, And it's possible that other people have ways of doing things that are quite effective, but I will try to at least narrow down to some things that they'll say just have to be true. Remember, that's obviously where I try to focus. So let's start with what has to be true regarding this. And also I can talk a little bit about, try to differentiate. If I say I personally do something, it's a little bit different than if I say it has to be true. And I'll try to see where it leads. Remember, everything what I'm doing, sometimes and commonly, I don't know the answer to these questions directly. I just kind of start to take inventory of what I know and then see where that leads, which is the process that I, of course, encourage you to do, and with everything. So an interesting thing is I've never really personally made a daily action plan. It is a fascinating thing for me because it's one thing I've struggled with kind of ideologically, not really these days, but I've struggled with ideologically a little bit is, do I like work enough? Do I work hard enough? Am I sometimes lazy? Yada, yada. But then the bottom line is, of course, I've managed to build quite a successful, approximately $10 million business in 3 years. And my income is well over $1 million a year. And hundreds of people are benefiting, if not thousands, from OMG. So, and that's not about me. That's about this idea where without this kind of daily action plan, doing and having many times and days when I've delayed on things, I haven't just barreled forward with taking. There's a way that I definitely have taken massive action, and everyone I know that personally that makes a lot of money, they seem to have taken a fair amount of significant action for some number of probably months or years. It's not necessarily the case that has to be done. In practice, it's probably a little bit of a, if you're going to have to choose one or the other, probably err on the side of focusing in pretty strongly. That doesn't mean doing a lot of tasks so much as like really focusing. But in terms of a daily action plan, or if other things are coming up, then the scenarios thing is going to almost certainly be very helpful. Is you can look at the type of thing that's coming up. If it's directly work related, that's making you money, that's one thing. If it's doing emailing or some sort of interaction that isn't necessarily making you money, but sometimes things are building towards you making money. So you want to be real careful with this, with the overly simplified idea of just do tasks that clearly make you money. I do pay attention, and again, I'm taking a little bit of inventory of things I know. So this isn't going to be like a perfectly organized as if I already did this and then we're going back in an organized way. But I do definitely pay attention to whether things are going to lead to making money. One of these is like, let's say, going to live events. Sometimes that's going to lead to making money. Sometimes it isn't. Here's a kind of a useful example. It's hard sometimes using examples from my own business because they can involve other people and reveal things that might not be revealed. But this I can share probably. So I was talking to a colleague, and there was an idea of maybe doing a physical mailing, like a snail mailing, to let people know about, let's say, the Miami assimilation event, where it's free, but people can come. And then maybe that would lead, and it would be a mailing not to OMGers, but to like maybe potential prospects, and in some way, shape, or form. And I think it would be. Oh, I don't even know if it could be to prospects. I don't know how. And I said that in order for that to lead to making money, and it could, but in order for it to lead to making money, we'd have to reach people, have them come to actually get the communication somehow, come to the event, and then purchase our program when they otherwise wouldn't have purchased the program. In other words, we might be able to reach those people and get them through an online, have them go through like webinars and online communications, right? And have them buy. So they might have bought anyway once we reached out to them. And there was a way, I'm remembering it maybe a little bit slightly wrong, but there was a way in which when I just worked through the scenario of how it would lead to us making money, it was a little bit far-fetched. Like it might, but it also might not. And it would have led to maybe 1 or 2 or 3 sales, where doing a whole project based on it, it wouldn't really necessarily be good bang for our buck. But when the idea was first brought up, it seemed like, hey, any kind of action can kind of help, it would help. It would stir things up. It would add to energy. But I kind of walk through what would happen for it to make money. And that's a positive example of what I mean, where you can walk through and see, is this going to make me money? It doesn't have to like lead instantly to making money, but at least just think, or not even will it make me make. Another question is, how will this make me money? And so instead of just having it be a yes or no question, you could say like, okay, the path to this action making me money is pretty convoluted, and where it's pretty unlikely for it to actually lead to making money. So then you can get rid of those tasks and you can declutter. One of the things that I do personally to get tasks done if I seem like I'm having trouble, and I don't really have trouble. The first thing is, if a task will clearly, if it's definitely the time to do it and it's going to help, then and it has to be done, then I personally don't have a problem doing it because I operate on necessity. And if I just can connect it up in my mind to what has to get done, then I just want to do it. So that might work for you, where if you're like, look, this has to be done one way or the other, so let me just do it. I like to just do stuff if they have to be done. Otherwise it's just going to be hanging in my mind and I'll have to do it anyway. So it's going to take up mind share that I want to have for other stuff until I do it. So then I feel quite motivated to do it. But let's say with a law of implication recording, I don't really do those. Like with those, it's a question because there's an interplay between preparation and then actually doing it. And it's not clear and obvious how much preparation I should do versus when I should do it. And there's kind of a way in which it either way can get inefficient at some point. And so I have to kind of eyeball it, right? And so if that's going on and you have to kind of just eyeball it, so to speak, then you don't at least let go of the guilt and don't worry too much about it. Mike at times has found it really helps to work in like half-an-hour blocks. I learned this with accelerated learning, and then take like a 5-minute break and he would do a certain number of blocks, and that would help him do certain tasks. For me, I've never quite done that, and it works out for me anyway. One other thing that's coming to mind that I wanted to share with you guys anyway is that life is sort of can be looked at in a way. I heard this from someone else and it kind of stuck with me and it's been useful. It's kind of there's certain opportunities that are particularly important and you really want to show up and take advantage of those opportunities. And that's when you want to, chalk it up to 100%. Other times in life, I kind of keep things at around maybe 70% maxed out. So I'm a little flexible and so forth. If there's an opportunity that's really hot, it's really time to hit it, then you want to see that and recognize that in life and connect it up with your mind with scenarios where you want to look like picture what'll happen if you really take advantage of it. And I've used the example before of like when Greg came along and I had the opportunity to set up a business with him. Then that was a really major opportunity. And so I really worked nonstop on that to make sure it worked and to really, really be there for it. So if ranking your websites is like that for you now, if this is the time, and for a lot of you, this might be the time, it's OMG, you're in it. This is a uniquely wonderful opportunity. I would assert. I can't totally prove that, but I would assert that it likely is. It's the time and the place to take advantage of it now. Very realistic to within over the next 2 years make enough money to set yourself up for life. There's something called an annuity, by the way. And there's a number of different ways that they can work, but I just recently had this idea and I talked to a friend of mine who knows about this stuff and it exists where you can put like, let's say $500,000 in. I'm 42. And then around when I'm 60, I can start taking out like $55,000 a month. Not taking out the principal's gone. It's not there for you, but it's like a contract between you and a very well-established company. In this case, I think Guardian, it's called. That's one of the top well-known, around for almost 200 years, 150 years company. Like insurance type company, and you get like $5,000 a month for the rest of your life, right? So you're pretty set at that point. So that's $500,000. With OMG, you focus in for a year or two. It's realistic to make that, even if it takes 5 years, right? And now you're pretty much set forever as like a stable base, and you can expand past that and buy some real great stuff as well. and have these luxuries and so forth. But then you can decide if that's what you want. But maybe if you look at it that way and you kind of care, I said that because remember I talked about sometimes it's good to zoom in on details. It might have seemed like a bit of a tangent about the annuity, but actually it's a triangulation where you're zooming in on a detail with your mind, and that helps you to picture it better with a scenario. And then that might mobilize you even better. And if you focus in on that, perhaps as an example, then that might be like, you might say like, wow, this is the time and the place to just hit it. And I'm going to declutter my life. I'm going to tell my family that I'm going for this. That might kind of excite them too, and say, I'm going to look to just focus in for now. And I don't want to be forever. It's not that I'm obsessed with work forever. It's not that work is more important than you guys, but now is the time, and I'm here to win, and I want to make this work, and I'm going to focus in and just do that. Right? And you have the method for doing that because you don't have to set yourself for failure. You just take a look at that original slide that I have. I'll put it back up. Go through this little checklist with these dots that I have that all in place. And you can really have inevitable success with online business, OMG, whatever you want to call it. Because there's so many different ways that you can do OMG. You can follow like our main idea with either the retail arbitrage or with the Amazon, or with do like My City SEO. That's a great blueprint to follow. But one way or the other, there's so many angles. It ultimately comes down to you make an offer of your own, right? You get a skill, you make an offer, probably maybe with SEO consulting, whatever. Maybe some other product that you make, and you just get traffic to that. Get traffic to your offer with what you learn in OMG. But one way or the other, with online business, you could focus in and you can get yourself set for life in the next several months, a year or two, 5, whatever it takes. So I think I'll end the webinar on that note, and we'll continue certainly in the future. And thank you guys for participating. I'm grateful to you. This helps me build my understanding as well as helping with you guys. Thanks, guys. You're so welcome. I appreciate the comments. I'll give it another minute or so you don't get cut off in the final comments that you're making, and then I'll end the webinar. You're on the winning team. Let's just do this together and win. All right, so long, and thanks for all the fish.